He had nothing. No shelter, no provisions, not even boots fit for the Dakota winter closing in around him. But when 17-year-old Marcus Thorne found the unconscious woman bleeding into the snow, he made a choice that would bring 40 warriors to his makeshift camp before sunrise. What he thought was simple mercy was about to unleash something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The wind tore through Marcus's threadbare jacket as he descended the frozen riverbank, his stomach hollow from 4 days without decent food. Winter was bearing down on the northern plains, and at 17, he'd learned survival meant stealing scraps from trading posts and sleeping wherever the cold wouldn't kill him. A streak of crimson against pristine white stopped him cold. Blood. Fresh blood. Following the trail, Marcus discovered her. A young Lakota woman, perhaps near his age, collapsed and bleeding from a vicious wound on her side. Her beaded dress was shredded, and ice had already begun forming in her black hair. She had minutes, not hours. Every survival instinct screamed at him to keep walking. Getting tangled in tribal business meant danger, the kind that got drifters killed or branded as troublemakers by settlers and natives alike. But staring at her pale face, something deeper than self-preservation took hold. Before we continue this story, we need to hear from you. Drop a like, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. Your support keeps these tales coming. "Can't leave you here to die," he muttered, kneeling beside her trembling form. She stirred as his hand touched her shoulder, dark eyes snapping open with primal fear. Her fingers clawed toward a bone-handled knife at her waist, but weakness made her movements slow and clumsy. "Easy," Marcus said, raising both hands. "I want to help." She spoke rapidly in her native tongue, gesturing frantically toward the northern hills. Even without understanding the words, her meaning was clear. She needed to get home, and fast. The woman tried standing, but collapsed immediately, crying out as her wounded side buckled. Marcus caught her before she hit frozen ground, feeling how dangerously cold her skin had become. Hypothermia was already setting in. "Those hills?" he asked, pointing north. "That's 3 days through the Badlands." She nodded desperately, tears freezing on her cheeks. Marcus looked at his pathetic supplies, barely enough food for himself, no medical gear, and winter clothing more holes than fabric. Taking her through that territory would likely kill them both. Leaving her here would definitely kill her. "All right," he said quietly. "We go together, or we both freeze, trying." For the next 20 hours, Marcus half-carried, half-dragged the woman through terrain that would challenge experienced frontiersmen. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words he couldn't understand that felt in his bones, desperate prayers maybe, or warnings he was too exhausted to process. When they finally reached the edge of her tribal lands as dawn broke, she managed to stand on her own. She pressed something into his palm, a small carved stone that felt warm despite the freezing air, before disappearing into the pine forest without looking back. Marcus stumbled back toward his riverside camp as morning light spread across the frozen plains, exhausted but breathing. He'd done the right thing, even if it nearly killed him. But as he approached his shelter beneath the rock overhang, something made his blood turn to ice. Dozens of hoof prints surrounded his camp. Fresh prints, still sharp in the snow. And carved into the cottonwood beside his makeshift lean-to was a symbol he'd never seen before. 3 parallel lines crossed by a lightning bolt. Someone had been here. Someone who knew exactly where to find him. Marcus circled his camp twice before entering, his hand never leaving the rusty blade tucked in his belt. The tracks told a story he didn't want to read. At least 20 horses, maybe more, all shod in the distinctive style he'd seen on tribal ponies. They'd waited here for hours, studying his meager belongings, learning his patterns, searching for something. Inside his shelter, everything looked exactly as he'd left it. But something felt wrong. His sleeping blanket had been moved just slightly, enough for someone who knew every thread of his few possessions. His tin cup sat at a different angle. Even his collection of river stones had been disturbed. "Looking for something," he whispered to the empty space. "But what?" His fingers found the carved stone the woman had pressed into his palm. In daylight, he could see it clearly. Polished black rock, with intricate symbols carved deep into its surface. It pulsed with warmth against his skin, almost alive. A branch cracked outside. Marcus froze, every muscle tensing. That wasn't wind. Something heavy had stepped on dead wood. Something trying to move quietly, but failing. Peering through a gap in the rocks, his heart nearly stopped. 4 warriors sat motionless on their horses 40 yards away, watching his shelter. War paint marked their faces, and eagle feathers adorned their hair. Their eyes never moved from his hiding place. They knew he was inside. One warrior raised his hand, and somewhere behind Marcus's shelter, horses whinnied softly. More riders. He was surrounded. The lead warrior dismounted slowly, deliberately, his hand resting on a war club that looked like it had seen recent use. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the thin winter air. "Boy who helped our sister, we know you are there." Marcus's throat went dry. Sister. The woman was family to whoever these men were. "Come out. We wish to speak." Every fiber of Marcus's being screamed danger. In every story he'd heard, whites who got involved with tribal affairs ended up scalped or worse. But he was trapped like a rabbit in a den, with nowhere to run, and winter closing in. The warrior continued, his voice carrying an edge that raised every hair on Marcus's neck. "You have something that belongs to us." The carved stone seemed to burn against his palm. Whatever this object was, it was important enough to bring armed men across the frozen plains. Important enough to track him down within hours. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decision. Step outside and face whatever these warriors wanted, or stay hidden and eventually die of cold and thirst when winter trapped him here. When he opened his eyes, the lead warrior was walking directly toward his shelter entrance, and his expression suggested patience was no longer an option. Marcus stepped from his shelter with hands raised, the carved stone hidden in his closed fist. 40 warriors materialized from behind rocks and trees like shadows gaining form. More men than he'd imagined, all armed, all watching him with expressions he couldn't read. The lead warrior stopped 6 feet away, close enough that Marcus could see the intricate scars marking his weathered face. This was no ordinary hunting party. These were seasoned fighters, and their presence here meant something far more serious than a simple rescue. "I am Chayton," the warrior said in measured English. "Winona is my sister." Marcus's mouth went dry. A war chief's sister. He'd saved a war chief's sister without knowing it, and now her brother stood before him with enough men to destroy a small settlement. "She told me what you did," Chayton continued, his dark eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "How you carried her through killing cold when you could have walked away." The other warriors remained silent, but Marcus could feel their tension like electricity before a storm. One wrong word, one misunderstood gesture, and this conversation would end very differently. Anyone would have done the same, Marcus managed, though his voice cracked. Chayton's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. No, most would not. Most fear us too much to risk helping. He gestured to his men. We have been hunting the men who attacked our winter camp. 4 settlers with rifles who shot my sister when she tried to warn them away from our sacred grounds. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Settlers. White men like him. Men who might assume he was working with them. We tracked them to this river, Chayton said, his voice growing harder. Their trail led directly past your shelter. We thought perhaps... He left the sentence hanging, but the implication struck Marcus like a physical blow. They'd suspected him of being involved in the attack. But Winona described the boy who saved her, Chayton continued. Thin, hungry, with kind eyes and gentle hands. Not the description of men who shoot women. Relief flooded through Marcus, but it was short-lived. If these warriors were hunting armed settlers in his territory, blood would be spilled soon. And when territorial authorities came looking for answers, they'd find him, the only white face in the area. The men you're hunting, Marcus said carefully. They're still up here. Chayton nodded grimly. Close, very close. They made camp in the valley below, thinking they are safe. His hand moved to his war club. They are wrong. One of the younger warriors spoke rapidly in their native tongue, pointing toward the valley. Chayton's expression darkened as he listened. What is it? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. My scout says smoke rises from their camp. They are cooking fresh meat. Chayton's voice turned deadly quiet. Meat they stole from families they murdered 2 days ago. The weight of the situation crashed down on Marcus. He was trapped between a war party seeking vengeance and desperate criminals with nothing left to lose. The plains that had been his refuge were about to become a killing ground. Chayton stepped closer, his presence commanding and dangerous. You saved my sister's life. For this, I offer you choice. Marcus waited, hardly breathing. Leave these plains now, before the sun sets. Ride far and fast, and never return. Chayton's eyes bore into him. Or stay, and help us end the men who spill innocent blood on sacred ground. The carved stone felt heavy in Marcus's palm as he realized the impossible position he was in. Run and spend his life looking over his shoulder, or stay and become part of something that could destroy everything. But as Chayton waited for his answer, gunshots echoed from the valley below. The killing had already begun. If you're hooked on this story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We bring you tales like this every single week. And your support means the world to us.